Some people are born into power. Others are broken into truth. But real love, it begins where lies end. And sometimes, the person you fall for is the one you were taught to destroy. The wind didn't move. The trees didn't shake. Everything in the forest held its breath. Julie stood in a muddy clearing, wearing boots that didn't fit and clothes he didn't remember choosing. His breath came slow, like he'd forgotten how lungs worked. His hands hung open at his sides, scraped, raw, still healing. He didn't know his name, but someone else did. A tall man, dressed in black from neck to toe, stood 10 feet away. No badge, no logo, just silence and a firm stare. "Julie Van," the man said flatly, as if stating the time. Julie's heart pounded against his ribs. The sound didn't echo in his head, it thundered. Julie Van. The name scratched at the inside of his mind like a code he couldn't crack. He turned his head slowly. Zuri stood behind him, lips parted but silent. Her face was still, but her eyes betrayed her. Wide, afraid, unblinking. The man looked from Julie to Zuri and back again. "You don't remember, do you?" he asked. Julie's voice came out rough, like gravel dragged across metal. No. He stared at Zuri now. Her hands were trembling. Not enough for the others to see, but enough for him to feel it. She had held those hands over his chest when he couldn't breathe. She had whispered comfort into his ear when pain made him scream in his sleep. She had been the first face he remembered waking up to. And now she wouldn't meet his gaze. "Zuri," he said. She blinked. "Who am I?" She opened her mouth, closed it. Julie stepped forward. His voice broke. "Who are you really?" The clearing stayed quiet, but inside him, something had cracked. Not a memory, not yet. Just a fracture, the kind that makes space for truth. Have you ever trusted someone with your heart, only to find out they were never who they said they were? Maybe it was a friend, maybe a lover, maybe the one person who made you feel safe, but kept a truth buried just out of reach. What would you do if you woke up one day and found out your entire life was built on someone else's choice? Would you be grateful, or would you feel betrayed? Julie couldn't move. The man in black had said the name like it was permanent. Julie Van. A name that felt expensive, cold, familiar, but only at the edge of something sharp. His hands curled into fists. His body didn't know the name, but it recognized the weight of it. He wasn't some handyman from a quiet mountain town. He wasn't Jack. He wasn't hers. Zuri's silence said everything. Julie stepped back, not out of fear, but distance, the kind that grows between two people when one has kept something buried for too long. You said we met at the old market," he said slowly. "You said we were together for years." Zuri's throat moved, but no words came. He kept going, his voice shaking with something deeper than fear. "You said I fixed things with my hands, that I worked with tools, that I didn't talk about the past because it was hard." Her lips quivered. Julie's jaw tightened. "You built me." Zuri looked down. Tears touched the corners of her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "You made me someone I'm not." Her voice came low. "I made you someone I could stand to love." Julie flinched. Zuri finally looked up. "But I didn't lie to hurt you," she whispered. "I lied because you were lost, because I was angry, because I thought you'd leave the second you knew the truth. And maybe I was right." Julie stared at her. The clearing was still filled with quiet strangers, but now all he could hear was her. "Would you have told me," he asked, "if they hadn't shown up?" Her silence was the answer. Julie didn't blink. The name still echoed in his head. Julie Van. He didn't remember building an empire. He didn't remember signing contracts or launching tech that shaped nations. But standing there, watching the security team stay silent until he spoke, it made something clear. This wasn't just about love. This was about power. His name wasn't a name. It was a command. And the woman who had whispered comfort into his sleep had taken that name away before he even knew it existed. "You knew," he said again. Zuri nodded once. Her lips pressed together like they were holding back an earthquake. You knew what I was worth. Her voice came, quiet but steady. I knew what you had done. Julie didn't move. She stepped forward, not to plead, not to explain, but to speak. You destroyed people with clean hands. I was one of them. You never looked down far enough to see what your systems did to lives like mine. So when I found you broken, I told myself you deserved it. And for a while, I believed it. Julie's breath caught. But you weren't the man I remembered. You were kind, curious, you asked questions, you cared, and I didn't know how to let go of that. He shook his head. So you held on to the lie. I held on to you, she corrected. Julie's voice hardened. You say you loved me. But love doesn't rewrite someone's identity. Zuri didn't flinch. Neither does power. The strangers around them still hadn't moved. No orders were given. They were waiting for him. And suddenly Julie understood. This wasn't just about a crash. It was about control. A man like him, built in boardrooms, raised on leverage, had been reset. And she'd decided who he became. Was he a puppet? Was he a victim? Or was he free? He looked back at the man who'd called his name, then back at the woman who'd given him a new one. The truth wasn't just painful, it was dangerous. Because now he had to choose which man he wanted to be. Julie stood still as the weight settled in. He could feel it pressing on his chest. The life he didn't remember, the name he didn't choose, the truth Zuri had kept from him, and the love that somehow still held ground beneath it all. She had lied, but she had also stayed. She had built a world where he could breathe without power, where his hands created, not commanded, where his name wasn't currency. It was a whisper. He looked her in the eyes. If I stay, he said, do I stay as Julie Van or Jack? Zuri's voice didn't shake. You stay as the man who chooses who he wants to be. No one spoke for a long while. Behind him, the agents were still waiting. But in front of him stood the only woman who had ever told him no, the only one who had dared to see him stripped of everything and still feed him soup when he couldn't lift his arm. The one who didn't chase the name. She buried it, not for gain, but to survive her own pain. Julie let the silence settle. Then he took one step forward. Toward her, toward the mess, toward the truth. This story isn't about revenge. It isn't about power reclaimed. It's about the hardest kind of forgiveness, the kind that starts with, I see you, and I'm still here. What would you do if someone you loved built their love for you on a lie? Would you walk away, or ask why they did it? Let us know in the comments. This helps push our story out to more viewers. Like the video if you believe love must be built on truth. Subscribe to Mr. Victor Storytime for more powerful stories of betrayal, redemption, and hard-earned love. Comment below, what stayed with you the most from this opening? Now, let's begin the story, because everything that came before this moment was only the beginning. The Van name was older than most tech platforms in America, but by 2025, it had become more than a legacy. It was law. Van Quantum didn't sell products. It sold precision. It didn't chase customers. It controlled the digital backbone of global infrastructure, healthcare systems, government databases, military command systems, and predictive architecture that ran behind nearly every major organization on American soil. And it answered to one man, Julie Van. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. He didn't smile for magazines or chase headlines. He didn't have to. His presence in the boardroom was enough to freeze entire mergers. One word from him redirected funding at national levels. When he entered a room, phones silenced themselves and billionaires checked their posture. He wasn't feared for what he did. He was feared for how little he reacted while doing it. Julie's rise didn't come from scrapping at the bottom or clawing his way up. He was born into polished silence. White marble floors, East Coast academies, and dinner conversations centered around strategic positioning instead of affection. While other children asked questions about cartoons, Julie listened to men debate privacy laws and how to legally bury competitors. By 15, he was solving code bases grown men couldn't navigate. By 21, He was chairing global data privacy panels. By 29, he had already dissolved 2 rival tech empires without raising his voice. Everything about him spoke of control. His suits, his tone, his timing, even the way he blinked seemed intentional. But beneath that precision was emptiness. No warmth, no curiosity, no small talk. He ran algorithms better than he ran relationships. His office staff rotated every 6 months, not because of failure, but because no one could endure the cold. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't rude. He was absent, present in body, missing in spirit. Julie had no close friends, no published romances, no social scandals. He had assistants who feared disappointing him. He had lawyers who responded to the idea of problems before they could materialize. He had power, but nothing in his orbit resembled connection. To those who worked under Van Quantum's ceiling, Julie Van was a system more than a man. Flawless, fast, unreadable. And for years, that had been enough. Julie remembered numbers. Even now, slouched in a leather seat aboard his private Gulfstream, he whispered equations under his breath like hymns. The cabin was silent, smooth, insulated from the turbulence of everyday life. His eyes scanned the forecast projections from the East Asia microgrid merger, while a muted briefing flickered across his tablet screen. ETA 42 minutes. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. Julie didn't look up. His thumbs moved fast across the screen, annotating a high-risk acquisition that would eliminate the last of Van Quantum's mid-level competition in Chicago. Another quiet victory. Another silent checkmate. The jet cut through the dark above the Appalachians, cruising miles above scattered clouds and sleeping towns. Julie sipped once from the espresso tumbler beside him. No sugar, no cream, no hesitation. His chief of systems had said once, "Sir, you make decisions like you're already on the other side of consequence." Julie didn't respond then. But he remembered it now, because consequence was catching up, a noise, not loud, but wrong. A sudden jolt under his chair, a flicker of pressure inside his skull. Julie lifted his eyes, slightly annoyed, expecting turbulence data or a cockpit update. What he heard instead was the rapid blare of a low-altitude alert, followed by complete darkness. The cabin lights died instantly. The screen went black. The espresso cup slid. Julie reached for the side panel, but the aircraft tilted sharply left. Gravity shifted. The tablet hit the floor. The walls screamed. Then came metal, bending, splitting. Oxygen masks dropped, but the force pinned him back. The windows on his left burst inward, ripping cold night air across his face. His heart didn't race. It slammed. Not panic. Reflex. Julie wasn't trained for chaos. He was trained for command. But nothing in his controlled world prepared him for this. The jet spun. Or maybe the world did. The ceiling was gone. Or maybe his eyes had stopped working. There was no time for last words. No grand reflection. Only impact. Julie's body jerked forward. Screams. Fire. Trees. He saw them only for a second. Flashes between steel tearing apart and smoke pouring in. His last thought wasn't fear. It was frustration. This wasn't the plan. He didn't wake up fast. There was no gasp. No sudden bolt upright like in movies. His eyes blinked open the way fog lifts from a lake. Slow, confused, weightless. Above him, sky. Not blue, not grey. Just there. The kind of color that didn't belong to any hour. His mouth was dry. His chest ached. Every breath felt like it came from borrowed ribs. Julie tried to speak. Nothing came. Tried to sit. His muscles laughed in protest. The cold didn't bite, yet, but it hovered. He could feel it waiting. Somewhere nearby, birds chirped in short, cautious bursts. Not joy. Warning. He turned his head slightly. The side of his face scraped against dirt. Leaves. Mud. Sap. His left eye stung. The skin across his temple felt tight. Split open, maybe. There was no wreckage in sight. No metal. No fire. Just a forest stretched wide in all directions, too quiet, too still. And inside his skull, nothing. Julie blinked again. His thoughts were fragmented, not even blurry. Absent. Names didn't come. Places didn't form. He didn't remember boarding a jet. Didn't remember owning a company. Didn't even remember pain, only its leftovers. But the strangest part wasn't what he couldn't recall. It was what he could. A code, not a face, not a phone number. A line of numbers and symbols that meant nothing. And yet he knew it was important. His breathing turned shallow. Was it his name? No. Too long. Was it a date? A password? The numbers floated in his head with no anchor, like echoes without source. He tried to push himself up. His elbow buckled. His head throbbed. Something inside him knew that staying here meant dying here. He gritted his teeth and dragged his body a few inches forward. Then a few more. Hunger scraped his insides. His stomach twisted. But he kept crawling. Every inch was war. The forest wasn't kind. The roots were jagged. The branches low. The wind turned sharp. The ground refused to give comfort. His body wanted to stop. His mind, blank as it was, refused. Because somewhere, buried under pain behind silence, was a voice whispering, "You are not done." Zuri Mack had not planned to hike that day. Her boots sat by the door untouched since morning. Her jacket stayed on the chair. The trail had been a thought, nothing more. A place people went when they wanted quiet, when they needed space from a city that asked too many questions. But her apartment felt too small. The silence inside it pressed in, emails she no longer received, contracts that vanished without explanation, calls that stopped coming. She had spent the morning staring at her laptop, hands frozen over keys that once moved fast and sure. By noon, she closed it. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. There was no one left to tell. The trail sat at the edge of the old state land, rarely used, not because it was dangerous, but because it led nowhere. No scenic overlook, no cafe at the end, just miles of trees and time. Zuri welcomed that. She walked without music, without her phone in hand, just the rhythm of boots against dirt and the sound of her own breath, reminding her she still existed outside systems that had quietly erased her. She was nearly an hour in when she heard it. Not a voice, not clearly, a sound that didn't belong. She stopped, listened. The forest didn't change. Wind moved lightly through branches, leaves shifted, but beneath it all, there was something else, a low, broken sound, like air forced through a chest that didn't have the strength to hold it. Zuri turned off the trail. She followed the sound carefully, stepping over roots, pushing past brush, alert but calm. She had grown up knowing when to trust instinct. This was one of those moments. She found him near a fallen tree. At first, she thought he was dead. He lay on his side, clothes torn, face streaked with dirt and dried blood. His skin looked pale against the earth, lips cracked, eyes closed. One hand twitched faintly, fingers digging into the soil like he was afraid to let go. Zuri knelt beside him slowly. "Hey," she said, not touching him yet. "Can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered. A breath escaped him, shallow and strained. Relief washed through her, but only briefly. He was in bad shape. She checked his pulse. Weak, fast. She touched his forehead. Warm, but not burning. His breathing hitched again, uneven, like each breath was a decision. She reached for her phone, then stopped. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She looked at his face more closely now. The structure, the bone lines, the familiarity she couldn't place. Her chest tightened. No. She shook the thought away. Plenty of people looked like other people. That meant nothing. She focused, practical, present. "Okay," she murmured. "You're not dying today. I won't let that happen." She slipped her jacket off and draped it over him. He stirred, brow furrowing. "Easy," she said softly. "You're safe." His eyes opened. Blue, clear, confused. They locked onto her face like it was the only solid thing left in the world. "Where?" His voice broke after one word. She leaned closer. "You're on a trail. You collapsed. Do you know your name?" He frowned, tried to answer. Nothing came. His mouth opened again, closed. Fear flickered across his features, not loud, not dramatic. Quiet. Controlled. The fear of someone who sensed the ground beneath them had disappeared. "I don't know," he whispered. Zuri swallowed. That single sentence shifted everything. Memory loss wasn't common, but it wasn't impossible. Head trauma, shock, exposure, all of it lined up. She helped him sit up slowly, supporting his weight with more strength than she realized she had. "What's the last thing you remember?" she asked. He stared past her shoulder, eyes unfocused. "Numbers," he said after a moment. "I think. And pressure." "Do you remember a plane?" she asked carefully. He winced, pressed his fingers to his temple. "Noise," he said. Then, nothing. Zuri nodded, as if that settled something inside her. She stood, bracing herself. "There's a place not far from here, an old cabin. I can get you there, clean you up. You need rest." He looked up at her. There was no arrogance in his eyes, no entitlement. Just need. "Thank you," he said. 2 words, simple, honest. They moved slowly. Zuri half carried him, half guided him through the trees. He leaned into her without protest, trusting her weight, her direction. It took longer than she expected. By the time they reached the cabin, her arms burned and her breath came hard. She sat him down gently on the narrow bed inside and stepped back, assessing. He watched her every move. "You saved me," he said quietly. She didn't answer right away. She cleaned his wounds, gave him water, helped him sip soup she found in the cabin pantry. He ate like someone who hadn't eaten in days. When he finished, he leaned back, exhausted. "Can you tell me who I am?" he asked. Zuri froze. The question hung between them, heavy and fragile. She could tell him the truth. She could call authorities. Let systems handle him the way they handled everyone else. She looked at his hands. Scarred now, dirty, human. And then she saw it, the faint mark on his wrist, almost invisible, almost healed, a symbol she recognized. Her heart dropped. The world tilted. She knew who he was. She knew exactly who he was. The man in her cabin wasn't just a stranger. He was Julie Van, the man whose company had quietly ended her career, the man whose signature sat beneath decisions that cost people their homes, the symbol of everything she had lost. Her pulse thundered in her ears. He was watching her, waiting, trusting. Zuri inhaled slowly. "My name is Zuri," she said. He nodded. "I'm glad you found me." She forced a small smile. "You're Jack," she said. The word landed between them. "Jack," he repeated, testing it. "That sounds right." She nodded once. "You work with your hands," she continued. "You've been staying around here. You had an accident. Your memory will come back, but it takes time." He absorbed her words carefully, like someone afraid to drop them. "Okay," he said. The lie took root, and neither of them knew yet how deep it would grow. Zuri Mac's world had never been polished. She grew up where porch steps doubled as counseling chairs, where car alarms served as lullabies, and where neighbors yelled you good across the street, not out of nosiness, but loyalty. Her earliest memories weren't quiet. They were vivid, alive. Cookouts that bled into choir rehearsals. Playgrounds filled with cousins who weren't related by blood, but by survival. Apartments packed with ambition and not enough room. Her mother worked late shifts at the hospital. Her father fixed broken HVACs in buildings no one else cared to enter. Neither had degrees, but both taught her how to build things that worked and to stand straight when they didn't. Zuri loved tech before she had a desk to sit at. She tinkered with salvaged motherboards by age 12. She built her first neighborhood message board by 15. Her coding skills grew fast, not because of tutors or labs, but because she refused to let anyone else define what excellence should look like. She graduated from Howard, top of her class, with job offers lined up like trophies. But Zuri didn't chase titles. She chased purpose. That's what led her to Van Quantum. She hadn't applied directly. They'd spotted her during a local data privacy summit, where she presented a prototype designed to protect tenant housing data from predatory AI systems. Within weeks, one of Van Quantum's subsidiaries contacted her with a project offer. It wasn't framed as employment, more like partnership. Flexible pay, full development freedom, tools she'd never had access to before. She signed. At first, everything felt earned. She delivered on every deadline, exceeded expectations. Clients asked for her by name, but it didn't take long before the cracks appeared. Zuri started asking questions no one else would. Why are we only testing models in high-density Black and Latino zip codes? Why does this predictive tool flag low-income users as high risk based on purchase history? Why are developers being pushed to collect passive audio data on users without disclosure? The silence from leadership was cold. And then, things shifted. Meetings she once led were cancelled without notice. Access to back-end systems was revoked. Her name stopped appearing on project credits. Rumors began, unspoken at first, then louder, difficult to work with, disruptive, too emotional, doesn't understand the big picture. She wasn't fired. She was isolated. Zuri watched as contracts dried up, and new projects that should have been hers were rerouted through junior engineers with less skill but safer reputations. When she raised concerns to HR, the response was clinical. We encourage feedback through appropriate channels. Your tone in last week's compliance meeting was noted. It wasn't a fight. It was an erasure. By the time she realized she was being pushed out, it was too late. Her badge access was reset due to internal restructuring. Her inbox deactivated the following Monday. She sat in her apartment, staring at the blank login screen, heartbeat flat. No explanation, no apology, just silence. And the quiet truth that Van Quantum didn't make mistakes. It made decisions. Even before Van Quantum, Zuri had always walked the line between tech and justice. In college, she co-founded a coding boot camp for black girls in underserved neighborhoods. Not the PR kind, the kind that held classes in community centers with spotty Wi-Fi and borrowed laptops. She didn't care about media coverage, she cared about results. After graduation, she joined a digital coalition focused on algorithmic transparency. She spoke on panels, led workshops, created open-source tools that helped small businesses flag exploitative data practices in the tech tools they used. But she quickly learned how power responded to questions. It didn't argue. It excluded. Her name was quietly removed from coalition advisory boards. She stopped receiving invites to the panels she once helped build. Potential funders began to re-evaluate their direction. When she joined Van Quantum's subsidiary, she thought it was a turning point. They claimed to value ethics, promised transparency, even cited her community work during onboarding. She believed them, for a while, but once she flagged those internal risks, once she made her voice inconvenient, things changed. The quiet punishment started slow. A lead engineer stopped replying to her code pushes. A senior manager suddenly forgot to include her on a client call. She wasn't paranoid. She kept a record. She documented Slack threads, saved email chains, captured version history logs. But even with proof, there was no clear enemy, no single moment of conflict, just a rising tide of dismissal. When the contract ended, they claimed the scope had evolved, that the product had shifted direction, that her work was no longer aligned with new objectives. No offer to renew, no bridge left standing. After she left, she watched one of her prototypes resurface under a new team's name, stripped of the safety measures she'd built. The same tool, just weaponized. Zuri didn't cry. She archived everything and walked away. But resentment sank deep, not loud, not angry, Heavy, the kind that doesn't scream. It waits. The man slept for hours. Zuri sat by the cabin window, watching him breathe. She hadn't said it out loud, not even to herself. But now that the initial panic had passed, she couldn't deny what she'd seen. The face, the mark, the eyes. It was him, Julie Van. She whispered the name once under her breath, almost to make sure it was real. The first time she saw him in person had been across the room at a tech summit in DC. He had walked in late, flanked by handlers and assistants, calm and unreadable. She remembered thinking he looked like he'd been raised in a vault. Untouchable, ice in his veins. Now he was curled beneath an old quilt, cheeks pale, lips cracked, hand twitching gently in sleep. Human, breakable. When he stirred, she sat up. His eyes opened slowly, still glazed with fatigue and confusion. "Hey," she said softly, stepping closer. He blinked at her. "You stayed?" "Yeah." A pause. What's my name again?" he asked. Zuri's mouth felt dry. She had a choice. Tell him the truth and risk him remembering the kind of power he wielded. Or, "You're Jack," she said gently. "Jack Emery," he repeated it back. "Jack. We've been seeing each other for a while," she added. "Nothing formal. You've been working with your hands, small repair jobs. You like being out here, off-grid." He searched her face. "You said I had an accident?" She nodded. "You hit your head. Memory loss. The doctor at the clinic said it might take time." "Clinic?" "Yeah." She lied. "We walked in. They ran some quick checks. Said rest is key." He accepted it. Too tired to question. "Did I hurt anyone?" he asked. Zuri shook her head. "No, you've always been careful." That part was true. This version of him was careful. He closed his eyes again, and the lie settled into the room like furniture. The next few days blurred. Zuri kept him fed, washed the dried blood from his face, changed the bandages on his shoulder, sat with him as he tried to string memories together like beads from a broken necklace. He was gentle, thoughtful. He didn't bark questions. He didn't expect things. He listened. Every time he smiled at her like she was his anchor, her stomach twisted. The man she was growing attached to was built on a foundation of deceit. At night, she'd step outside the cabin and breathe the cold in alone. This was the man who'd signed away ethics in data systems that hurt her community, the man whose board had pushed her out. And yet, he'd become someone else now. Not by choice, by circumstance, and by her hand. She caught herself watching him too long, laughing at his dry humor, wanting to believe she hadn't created this just to even a score. But the truth was sharp. Julie Van carried access. He remembered codes in dreams. He could lead her back into the systems she once helped build, and this time she could rewrite them the way they should have been. She could correct the damage. She could open doors they locked behind her. She could reclaim what they stole. All it required was silence, and her soul. Every morning, she asked herself the same question: am I protecting him or using him? And every night, she answered with the only lie she could stomach: both. Julie's days began before the sun fully rose. The first few mornings were spent staring at the ceiling, trying to remember a life he couldn't grasp. But slowly, routine replaced frustration. His body still ached, but he moved with more purpose now. The bruises had faded, the gash across his temple healing under Zuri's careful hand. He'd wake early, fold the blanket neatly, and stretch in silence. Zuri had shown him the basics of the cabin: the wood stove, the manual pump for water, the food stores, the composting setup. He didn't ask why everything felt outdated. He accepted it. There was a comfort in not being overwhelmed by modern noise. No screens, no pings, no constant demands for attention. The kitchen became his first classroom. Zuri taught him to cook in pieces. First, how to boil water without burning the pot. Then, how to properly clean dishes. How to season food so it didn't taste like cardboard. She stood beside him, arms crossed, teasing him gently when he cut onions with too much hesitation. "Relax your grip," she said one morning as he fumbled with a carrot. "You're holding it like it owes you money." He chuckled, still stiff, still unsure, but willing. He made mistakes. Too much salt, burned toast, overcooked eggs. But each one mattered. Because for the first time in his life, at least the life he could remember, Julie did things for himself. No one fetched his meals. No one folded his clothes. No one cleared his space. He wiped down the table after every meal, learned to fold laundry evenly, repaired a loose drawer handle with glue and a clamp Zuri found in the back shed. There was something honest in it all. He looked at his hands more now, the calluses growing along his palms, the small cut healing over his thumb. They didn't remind him of power. They reminded him of effort. Zuri watched from a distance. She didn't interfere unless asked, but sometimes she paused in the doorway, watching him stir soup or wipe down a counter, and a softness crept across her face before she caught it. She saw a man forming, not from wealth, not from titles, but from small, stubborn acts of care. It started with curiosity. Julie found her laptop open one evening, code flickering across the screen. He didn't recognize the language, but the patterns tugged at something deep in him, a familiarity that made his fingers twitch. "What's this?" he asked. Zuri looked up from across the room. She didn't move to hide the screen. "A local logistics tracker," she replied. "Built it for a food redistribution group. Helps reroute excess produce from stores to shelters without wasting time or fuel." He leaned in closer. "It's elegant," he said slowly. "Efficient loops, prioritized queue." "You wrote this?" Zuri nodded. "Most of it. Few volunteers helped structure the back end." Julie tilted his head, squinting at a nested function. "This line, you're accounting for traffic data in real time? Only on weekends. Traffic sensors go dead in low-income zones after Friday. So I added a manual override based on historical patterns." He blinked. "You patched a public failure with private logic." She shrugged. "I patched what I could. Tech's only useful if it helps the right people." Julie didn't answer at first. He studied the lines again. "Teach me," he said. Zuri raised an eyebrow. "Code?" He nodded. "I want to understand this world." That night, she pulled out a second chair. Their sessions began in the evening, after dinner. Zuri explained syntax while Julie typed. She was patient, but didn't dumb anything down. "If you mess it up, it breaks," she said. "So don't just guess. Think." Julie learned fast, not because he remembered, but because something in him responded. Logic came easily. Patterns felt natural. Within days, he was debugging small loops. Within a week, he built a basic interface for her storage inventory app. Zuri didn't praise him out loud, but her smile stayed longer. Eventually, she showed him more. Her previous work, old pitch decks for startups that never got funded, non-profit dashboards she designed but never released. "These are brilliant," Julie said one night. "Doesn't matter," she replied. Nobody wanted tools that exposed bad data practices. They wanted clean-looking algorithms that said the right things and hid the wrong ones. He didn't know how to respond, but he knew this. He wanted to help. And every night they coded together, something between them shifted. Not just understanding. Respect. It happened slowly. Not the kind of slow that felt unsure, but the kind that built warmth with every shared glance, every unspoken gesture. Julie laughed for the first time while chopping vegetables. He'd tried mimicking Zuri's precise dicing method, only to have the knife slip and send a chunk of onion flying across the counter. "You have a vendetta against food prep," she said, grinning. He smiled, and then he laughed. A real, surprised laugh that echoed through the small cabin. Zuri paused, her arms folded, watching him. "You don't laugh often," she said. "I don't think I used to." "You do now." From then, moments like that multiplied. They played card games during power outages. Julie lost badly every time. Zuri accused him of faking his memory loss to avoid losing with dignity. He accused her of inventing rules. They shared more meals, more space. Comfort grew without force. One evening, Zuri handed him a mug of tea. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away. Julie looked up. Her eyes met his. It lasted longer than it should have. She didn't smile. She didn't look away. But something passed between them, soft, full of questions neither of them could voice yet. Another night, she fell asleep on the couch mid-conversation. Julie, who had been sitting beside her with a notepad in hand, reached over quietly and adjusted the blanket over her shoulders. He didn't touch her. He didn't wake her. But he stayed. Sometimes, they sat in silence after dinner. No coding, no chores, just quiet. And in those silences, they both felt the weight of what was forming. Not loud, not rushed, but present. Zuri didn't call it love. Julie didn't call it anything. But both of them were aware they were no longer pretending to be anything. The space between them had changed, and neither of them wanted to go back. They sat outside on the porch steps as dusk rolled in. The sky above them faded slowly. Crickets took over where birds left off. The world felt muted but full. Julie held a tin mug in both hands. The tea had long gone cold. Zuri sat beside him, arms resting on her knees, gaze fixed ahead. "I want to say something," he said quietly. Zuri glanced sideways. "Okay. I don't know who I was," he started, "but I get glimpses, not memories, more like habits, reflexes. I used to expect things without asking. I notice it sometimes, how I sit, how I speak, how I react when something doesn't go my way." Zuri said nothing. "I feel like I've done things I wouldn't be proud of," he continued. "To people like you. Maybe even to you." Her posture stiffened slightly. "I don't remember the harm," he said, "but I still feel responsible." Zuri looked at him fully now. "You think a clean slate means guilt?" "I think forgetting doesn't erase the damage," he replied. She exhaled. "That's rare," she said. "Most people only apologize when they get caught." "I'm not asking for a reset," he added. "I just don't want to keep walking blind to what I might have been." Zuri stared at him for a long moment. Then, softly, she asked, "Why do you care?" He didn't answer right away. Finally he said, "Because I don't want to be a man who needs reminders to treat people right." Zuri's throat tightened. The air between them shifted. He hadn't remembered what he'd done, but he was willing to carry the weight of it anyway. That mattered more than she wanted to admit. She reached for the mug in his hands, took it, and placed it down. Then she laid her palm gently on his. Not a kiss, not a confession, just a touch. And for Julie Van, the man who used to command rooms and crush competition, it was the first real connection he'd ever earned. The forest became familiar, not comforting in the way a home was comforting, but steady, predictable. Julie learned the rhythm of the land the same way he learned everything now, by repetition, by paying attention, by listening more than speaking. They walked most mornings, no destination, no urgency, just movement. Zuri set the pace. Julie followed without complaint. Sometimes she spoke about nothing at all, how the soil shifted near the creek after rain, how the trail narrowed if you didn't trim it each season, how the town miles away had changed hands 3 times without improving. Other days, they walked in silence. Julie liked those days most. The quiet didn't make him uncomfortable anymore. It felt like space where thoughts could form without pressure. He noticed how Zuri walked slightly ahead of him, always alert but never tense. He noticed how she slowed her steps when the path dipped, so he wouldn't stumble. At night, the cabin settled into stillness. They ate dinner at the small table, sometimes talking, sometimes not. The candle burned low. Shadows stayed soft. Julie cleaned up without being asked. Zuri dried dishes beside him. Their elbows brushed often now, neither of them pretending it was accidental. Afterward, they sat near the stove or on the porch steps. Julie read manuals Zuri had collected from old community projects. Zuri worked quietly, sketching ideas or refining code on her laptop. The bond formed without announcement. No declarations, no promises, just presence. Julie started noticing how he waited for her laugh, How he watched her hands when she spoke passionately. How he felt unsettled when she was quiet for too long. Zuri noticed too. She noticed how he asked permission before entering her space. How he listened without interrupting. How he never assumed. This wasn't the man she remembered from conference rooms and screens. This man walked beside her. This man waited. This man noticed. And that made everything more dangerous. It happened at the edge of the clearing. The same clearing where she had found him weeks earlier, where he had barely been breathing, where she had made the choice that changed everything. They stopped there without discussing it. The air was still. The sky dimmed slowly, not rushing toward night. Julie looked around. "This place feels important," he said. Zuri nodded. "It is." He turned to her, studied her face. "I don't remember what brought me here," he said quietly, "but I know something in me shifted here." Zuri's chest tightened. She should have stepped back. She didn't. Julie lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away. His fingers hovered near her cheek. "Is this okay?" he asked. Zuri swallowed, then nodded. His touch was gentle, careful, not possessive. His thumb brushed her cheek like he was learning her shape. When he leaned in, there was no rush. Their lips met softly. It wasn't fire. It wasn't hunger. It was warmth. Zuri closed her eyes. For a moment, just a moment, she let herself forget the lie, forget the name buried under Jack, forget the weight she carried alone. Julie pulled back first. "Sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to." She shook her head. "No, it's okay." But when she turned away, the tears came fast. She pressed her palms into her eyes, breath breaking. The guilt flooded in, sharp and heavy. Julie froze. "Hey," he said, panic creeping in. "Did I do something wrong?" Zuri shook her head again, unable to speak. "I can stop," he said. "I swear. I don't want to hurt you." That made it worse. She sank onto the ground, shoulders shaking. "I shouldn't have let that happen," she whispered. Julie knelt beside her, unsure, hands hovering. "Tell me what's wrong," he said. "Please." She wiped her face quickly, forcing her breathing to steady. "It's not you," she said. "It's me." He nodded, though confusion clouded his eyes. "I don't want to be something that breaks you," he said. Zuri looked at him then, and that was when she realized the truth. The man she was falling for would never have been capable of this kind of care before, and she was the reason he was here. Later that night, Julie couldn't sleep. He sat at the small table, staring at the wall where Zuri had pinned old diagrams and sketches, systems that weren't built to dominate, tools meant to help people quietly. Zuri joined him eventually, wrapping herself in a blanket. "You okay?" she asked. "I think so," he said. "I just keep thinking." "About what?" He paused. "About the world. I don't remember." She stiffened slightly. "I don't know what kind of man I was," he continued, "but I know I don't want to be him again. Not fully." Zuri stayed silent. "I dream sometimes," he said. "Not memories. Ideas. Cities that work differently. Systems that don't punish people for being poor or invisible. I don't know where those thoughts come from." Zuri swallowed. "I think," he went on, "that power without care does damage. And I think whoever I was before didn't ask enough questions." She turned to him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you matter," he said. "Your work matters. The way you think matters. If I ever get my memory back, I don't want to lose what I've learned here." Zuri's throat tightened. "I don't want success if it costs people their dignity," he said. "I don't want systems that look efficient but leave wreckage behind." He looked at her fully now. "If I ever have the chance to change things," he said, "I want to do it right." Zuri nodded slowly. The irony pressed in hard. He was describing the man he could have been, the man she had wanted him to be when she first joined Van Quantum. And now, he was standing right in front of her. That night, Zuri lay awake. Julie slept in the other room, breathing steady, peaceful. She stared at the ceiling, replaying everything. His patience, his humility, His apology for things he couldn't remember. She had taken something from him. Not just his name, not just his past. She had taken his choice. The man beside her now wasn't fake. He was real, earnest, capable of change. But he was built on a lie. And that truth waited like a fault line beneath everything they shared. Zuri sat up slowly and looked toward the doorway. If she told him now, she would shatter what they were becoming. If she stayed silent, she would be shaping him for her own reasons. She remembered the boardroom version of Julie Van. Cold, untouchable, certain. She looked toward the sleeping man again. This one asked permission. This one apologized. This one dreamed of fairness. And she knew, deep down, that if he remembered everything, this version of him might not survive. Tears slid quietly down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered into the dark. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." But it already had. Should she tell him the truth now? Or protect the man he's becoming? If you were in her place, what would you do? Comment below. Your voice matters here. It began without intention. Julie sat alone at the small wooden table just after dawn, the cabin still wrapped in early quiet. Zuri slept in the next room. The kettle hadn't been lit yet. No plans had been spoken for the day. In front of him lay a notebook Zuri used for rough ideas. Its pages were filled with half-formed diagrams, arrows pointing nowhere, short lines of text meant to be revisited later. Julie stared at a blank page. His hand moved before his mind caught up. He picked up the pencil and drew a straight line, then another beneath it. Between them, he added branching paths, nodes splitting cleanly into sections. He didn't pause to think. He didn't name anything. His wrist moved with certainty, like muscle memory guided it. Boxes appeared, layers stacked. A flow emerged. Julie leaned closer, breath shallow. The pencil scratched faster now. He added conditional loops, fail-safes, redundancy paths, access gates that opened and closed depending on internal triggers. It wasn't decorative. It wasn't abstract. It was functional. His head began to throb, not with pain, but pressure. Images pressed forward without context. Rooms with glass walls, long tables, screens filled with data streams. Julie dropped the pencil and stood abruptly. His heart pounded. "What is this?" he whispered to himself. He sat again, slower this time, studying the page. The structure felt familiar in a way nothing else had since the crash. Not comforting. Not emotional. Precise. He turned the page and began again, refining what he'd drawn. This time he added annotations, short, sharp notes that assumed deep understanding. Latency control, risk isolation, behavioral weighting. Words he didn't remember learning. Words his mouth felt comfortable forming. When Zuri emerged from the bedroom, she stopped in the doorway. She watched him for a moment, silent. Julie didn't notice her at first. He was lost in the act of building, something ancient stirring behind his eyes. When he finally looked up, his expression was unsettled. "I don't know why I'm doing this," he said, "but I feel like I need to finish it." Zuri stepped closer. Her gaze dropped to the notebook. Her breath caught. Zuri didn't speak right away. She leaned over the table, eyes scanning the page with growing intensity. Her hands hovered just above the paper, as if touching it might make it disappear. Julie watched her face shift. "This isn't random," he said. "Is it?" Zuri swallowed. "No," she replied quietly. "It's not." She reached for the notebook and gently turned it toward herself. Her fingers traced the lines, not reading but recognizing. "This is a distributed control framework," she said. "The backbone kind. It routes decision-making across layered systems so no single node looks responsible, even when outcomes are targeted." Julie frowned. "That sounds deliberate." "It is," she said. "And this structure, this exact layout, was proprietary, closed access. Only a few people would have known it in full." Julie's stomach dropped. "You've seen this before." Zuri nodded slowly. "I helped audit a derivative version once," she said. "Years ago. I never saw the core architecture, but this, This matches what was rumored, what internal engineers weren't allowed to touch. She flipped back a page. This section, she said, pointing, it's designed to simulate neutrality. It claims objectivity while quietly redirecting outcomes. That's why it was dangerous. Julie leaned back, stunned. So, I built this? Zuri didn't answer immediately. You knew this, she said instead. Intimately. Julie pressed his palms to the table. I don't remember any of it, he said. But when I draw it, it feels complete, like finishing a sentence I started years ago. Zuri closed the notebook. Her pulse raced. The man she had renamed Jack wasn't just remembering fragments. He was carrying an entire system inside him. That night, Julie slept heavily. Zuri didn't. She sat at the table long after the lamp burned low. The notebook closed in front of her like a secret that refused to stay buried. The sketch wasn't theory. It wasn't practice. It was proof. She needed to know how deep this went. When she finally stood, she moved carefully toward the bed where Julie slept. His jacket lay folded over a chair nearby, the one he'd been wearing when she found him. Her hand hovered over it. This crossed a line. She hesitated only a moment longer. Zuri checked the pockets slowly, deliberately. A folded scrap of paper, a worn key she didn't recognize, and then her fingers brushed something solid, flat, hidden in the inner seam. She pulled it free. A small tag, no bigger than a thumb, matte black, edges scuffed. A faint symbol etched into one corner. Zuri's breath stopped. She turned it over. Embedded beneath the surface was a microchip, not consumer grade, not something sold openly, a locator and access tag. Her mind raced. This wasn't something someone carried casually. It was issued, tracked, registered. She remembered internal conversations from years ago, whispers about executive-level security protocols that went beyond phones or cards. She closed her fist around it. The room felt smaller. Zuri sat back down slowly, the tag heavy in her palm. Julie Van hadn't just survived a crash. He had vanished with pieces of the system still attached to him. Zuri didn't sleep. She returned the tag carefully, exactly where she found it. She washed her hands, though they weren't dirty. She paced the cabin once, twice, then sat again. Her thoughts aligned with cold clarity. Julie carried more than memories. He carried access. The sketch proved his mind still held the blueprint. The tag suggested there were doors that might still open for him, doors Van Quantum would never allow her to touch again. She opened her laptop quietly, offline mode, no signals. She pulled up archived files she'd never deleted, old audits, redacted diagrams, notes she kept when her instincts told her to save copies. The patterns matched, not perfectly, but close enough. Zuri leaned back, staring at the ceiling. She could rebuild parts of the system using what he remembered. She could expose the architecture that hid accountability. She could correct design choices that caused harm. She could finally finish what she started. But the cost was clear. Every step forward meant deeper deception. Every calculation meant pushing Julie further into a role he didn't choose. She looked toward the bedroom door. He trusted her. He had apologized for harm he couldn't remember. He had shown her who he could be without power shaping him. Zuri closed her laptop. Her chest ached. This was no longer about anger. It was about temptation, and for the first time since she named him Jack, she admitted the truth to herself. She wasn't just protecting him anymore. She was beginning to plan. Zuri noticed the change before she admitted it. It started with mornings. The smell of boiling water turned her stomach. Bread, which she usually loved, made her pause before eating. Her body felt slower, heavier, like gravity had increased without warning. She blamed stress first, long nights thinking, too much tension, not enough sleep. But the signs kept returning, quiet and persistent. One morning she stood over the sink longer than usual, hands braced on the counter, breathing through a sudden wave of nausea. Julie knocked gently on the door. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," she answered too quickly. "Just tired." He nodded, trusting her. That trust made her chest tighten. Days passed. Her appetite shifted. Her emotions followed no pattern she could predict. Some moments she felt sharp and focused, others fragile in ways she didn't recognize. She counted days in her head, then weeks. The realization landed softly but firmly. Zuri sat alone at the table that night, hands folded over her abdomen, staring at the wood grain like it might answer her questions. This wasn't part of any plan. This wasn't strategy. This was life, pushing back. Julie noticed the change in her, though he didn't name it. He brought her water, without asking, took over cooking when she went quiet, watched her with concern that didn't demand explanation, and each small kindness made the truth heavier. Zuri had lived with anger before. It was familiar, structured, useful. Anger gave her clarity. It kept her moving when systems shut doors in her face. It sharpened her mind when she needed to outwork people who underestimated her. But this was different. Now, anger had competition. She sat outside one evening, notebook open on her lap, unable to focus. The ideas she once chased with precision blurred at the edges. Her thoughts split cleanly in two. One voice reminded her of everything she'd lost. The quiet removal, the stolen work, the way Van Quantum had closed ranks and pretended she never mattered. The other voice spoke softer. It reminded her of the man who chopped vegetables too carefully, who apologized without prompting, who asked before touching her hand. Both voices were right. She could still use what Julie carried, the knowledge in his head, the access buried inside him, the tag, the sketches. She could expose the truth and force accountability. But at what cost? Julie wasn't pretending anymore. He wasn't playing a role. He was becoming someone new, and she was shaping that process with silence. Zuri pressed her fingers into her temples. If you tell him, she whispered to herself, you lose him. If she didn't, she would be choosing her outcome over his consent. The choice was no longer clean. It cut both ways. Julie disappeared for most of the afternoon. Zuri noticed but didn't ask. He'd been doing that lately, taking long walks alone, coming back thoughtful, quieter than usual. When he returned, he carried something behind his back. Sit, he said, smiling nervously. She raised an eyebrow. What are you hiding? He stepped forward and revealed it. A small, carved figure. Rough, imperfect, shaped from a branch she recognized from near the creek. The edges were uneven, the surface smoothed carefully by hand. It's not great, he said quickly. I'm still learning. Zuri took it gently. It was a woman, abstract, strong lines, upright posture. She looks like someone who doesn't bend easily, he said. I thought, maybe that's you. Zuri's throat tightened. You made this? She asked. He nodded. I wanted to give you something that didn't come from a store. Something I made. With time, she turned it over in her hands. This man, this version of him, had no idea what he once could have bought with a gesture like this. And yet, nothing he had ever owned could match its weight. Thank you, she said quietly. Julie watched her closely. I know things feel heavy lately, he added. I don't need to know why. I just want you to know I'm here. Her eyes burned. He didn't ask questions. He didn't demand clarity. He offered presence, and that broke her open. That night, Zuri couldn't hold it in anymore. She waited until Julie slept, then stepped outside into the cool air. The sky stretched wide above her, indifferent and vast. She sat on the steps and let the tears come. Quiet at first, then heavier. She pressed her palm against her stomach, breath shaking. What am I doing? She whispered. She wasn't sure anymore if she was protecting Julie from a past that would crush him, or protecting herself from consequences she couldn't face. The gift lay on the table inside. The carved figure felt like an accusation. Julie was choosing her without knowing the truth, and she was choosing silence while the stakes grew higher. Zuri wiped her face and stood slowly. She loved him. That truth settled fully now, undeniable. But love built on silence carried its own damage. She leaned against the doorframe, staring into the darkness beyond the trees. "I don't know how to do this right," she whispered. "I don't know if I ever did." Inside, Julie slept peacefully, and Zuri stayed awake, caught between who she had been and who she was becoming, uncertain whether she was saving him or saving herself. Have you ever wanted to confess something but couldn't? What stopped you? Fear, love, or timing? Van Quantum never made public announcements about internal breaches. It didn't need to. When the jet carrying Julie Van disappeared, official statements said nothing. No media leaks, no search appeals, no family interviews. But inside the highest clearance levels of the company, protocols activated. A contained incident report labeled Tier Red. The priority was not mourning. It was containment. Julie Van wasn't just a figurehead. He held systems in his memory that were deliberately compartmentalized. Layers of intellectual property, proprietary code, executive-level encryption keys. Once it became clear that he hadn't died in the crash, the board escalated without hesitation. The first search grid covered 100 miles. Every drone and satellite feed scrubbed and reviewed. But Julie had moved on foot, disoriented, bleeding, outside signal range. So they shifted focus. The tracker in his executive tag hadn't pinged since the crash. They assumed the chip was damaged until a faint signal returned during a low sweep scan over the outer Appalachians. No coordinates, just a trace, the kind of trace only one team was trained to follow. Van Quantum's Internal Recovery Division, Unit 3K, moved into place within hours. No uniforms, no badges, only encrypted tablets, ground sensors, heat scans, and orders to return Julie Van with minimal noise and maximum speed. The signal resurfaced 3 times over 10 days. Close enough to track, but not enough to intercept. Still, the direction was clear now. A loose cluster of outdated cabins, forested back roads, and disconnected land that didn't belong to any utility grid. They didn't speak in terms of rescue, they spoke in terms of retrieval. And Zuri had no idea the net was beginning to close. The message came in a quiet moment. Zuri sat on the porch, wrapped in a worn hoodie, sipping tea that barely stayed warm in the mountain air. Julie was inside fixing the stove, humming quietly. The notebook lay beside her, closed. The chip tag still hidden where she left it. Her old phone, barely powered, rarely used, vibrated once. She nearly didn't check it. The number wasn't familiar, but the tone of the message punched through her chest. "Zuri, they're searching. They found a trace near you. Be careful. Delete this." It came from someone she hadn't spoken to in over a year. Marcus, a former developer turned freelance ethics consultant. He had contacts, quiet ones who knew how Van Quantum moved when they didn't want to be seen. Zuri stared at the screen, pulse rising. She checked the signal, low, barely holding. She'd kept the device off-grid for a reason. She didn't trust new networks, but the chip must have pinged, not her device but his. She didn't respond to the message, didn't risk it. She powered down the phone and stashed it deep in her storage box. Her fingers trembled just slightly as she stood. Inside, Julie was on his knees near the stove, adjusting a panel. He looked up, smiling. "Almost done," he said. "We might actually have heat without restarting it 6 times. Zuri forced a nod. "Good," she said softly. But her thoughts spun fast. They were coming, not because of her, because of him, and she didn't have a plan. That night, Zuri barely slept. She paced the small cabin while Julie dozed in the next room. The chipped tag still worked. That much was clear now. Even if it wasn't broadcasting constantly, it had flared just long enough to light a path. She could destroy it, crush the chip, burn the tag, but it wouldn't erase what Julie remembered, or what he was. And if Van Quantum found them, they wouldn't be asking for permission. By morning, she made a decision. They needed to leave. She found Julie outside, stacking kindling. He looked up, cheeks flushed from the cold, hands raw but steady. "We need to talk," she said. He stood slowly, What's wrong? Zuri hesitated. Something's changed. Julie watched her face carefully. I need you to trust me, she said. If I tell you we need to go, no questions, you come with me. Can you do that? Julie didn't answer immediately. Is someone looking for me? He asked. Zuri blinked. The question landed too close. I think so, she replied. He nodded once. Then I'll follow your lead. Zuri stared at him. You're not going to ask who? He shook his head. I've had more peace here with you than I've ever felt in whatever life I lost. If you're worried, I believe it's real. She exhaled slowly. That trust was a gift she hadn't earned, and it was going to be tested soon. She meant to hide it. She'd planned to pack it away that morning. Her external drive, backup logs, the encrypted files she used to cross-check his sketches with old Van Quantum audits. But she forgot to close one tab. Julie found it while she was out gathering supplies. The laptop had fallen asleep. When he tapped the spacebar, the screen lit up. At first he didn't recognize anything. Just folders, code, text, logs. Then he saw it. A photo of himself, in a dark suit, sharp jawline, standing at a podium with the Van Quantum logo behind him. It felt like being punched in the chest. Julie sat slowly, eyes locked on the image. It was him, not just physically. The expression, the posture, cold, calculated. He scrolled. Another photo, a partial boardroom transcript, meeting minutes from high-level development talks. He opened a document labeled Override Ethics Pipeline, flagged by ZMAC. His name was in it. Hers too. Then came notes. Her notes. About him. About his past decisions. About the architecture they had built. About how it all connected. Julie's fingers hovered over the keyboard. The version of him in these files was nothing like the man he was now. Nothing like what Zuri had shown him. And then he saw the notebook beside the laptop. Hers. He opened it. Inside were hand-drawn reconstructions, his sketches, but annotated, interrogated, marked with her thoughts, her fears, her warnings. He closed the lid slowly. Zuri returned moments later. She froze when she saw him sitting there. Their eyes met, and in Julie's face was something she hadn't seen in weeks. Recognition, not of memory, of betrayal. They came at dawn. 3 SUVs, blacked out, no markings, no sound except tires on frost-packed dirt, slid to a stop just outside the tree line. The engines stayed running. No doors opened. Inside the cabin, Zuri stirred from half-sleep. Something felt wrong. A weight in the air. Not the usual tension she'd grown used to carrying, but disruption. Arrival. She pulled herself out of bed fast and moved toward the window. Her breath caught. She didn't have to guess who they were. This wasn't local police. This wasn't search and rescue. This was Van Quantum, the recovery protocol she had only heard rumors about. Unbranded vehicles, silent personnel, no warning. Julie sat at the table, already dressed, already watching her. You felt it too, he said quietly. She nodded. They're here. He stood slowly. His eyes didn't leave hers. Are you going to tell me what this is? He asked. Zuri's jaw tightened. Before she could answer, movement outside drew her gaze. The SUV doors opened in sync. 5 men stepped out. No words. No weapons drawn. But they spread like they'd done this before, clearing angles, calculating entry points, eyes scanning. Julie took a step back, not out of fear but instinct. I know them, he said under his breath. Not faces, not names, but posture, purpose. It was familiar in a way he hadn't wanted it to be. Zuri grabbed her jacket. We don't have time, she said. Julie didn't move. They're not here to ask questions, she added. Still, he stayed rooted. The lead man stopped 15 feet from the cabin door. Then, calmly, he spoke. Mr. Van, we're here to bring you back. No gun, no force. Just the voice of authority that expected obedience. Julie's body froze. The name wasn't Jack. It was Julie Van. And everything inside him shifted. Julie stood still. The name hovered in the cold air like smoke. Julie Van. He didn't flinch. But inside, something cracked. They said it like it belonged to him, like it had always been his, like he was the one out of place for not recognizing it. The men didn't draw weapons. They didn't shout. They didn't need to. Julie's breath turned shallow. He wasn't afraid of them. He was afraid of what their presence unlocked. Memories didn't rush in. They pressed. Pressure in the back of his skull. Images without context. Phrases he didn't remember learning. Boardroom lights. Voices layered with confidence and cruelty. Meetings where silence was strategy. Rooms where he had been the one giving orders. Zuri stood beside him, arms tense, shoulders lifted. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Julie looked at the lead man again. "You've called me that before," he said. "Haven't you?" The man didn't smile, didn't blink. "Yes, sir. It's your name." Julie swallowed. "And her?" he asked, nodding toward Zuri. The man didn't even glance her way. "She is not part of this." Zuri's fists clenched. "I'm not going anywhere." Julie's voice stayed calm. "She found me." "She withheld you," the man corrected. "We're not here to debate it. We're here to restore operational integrity." The words were clean, sanitized. Julie looked back at Zuri, and something in him broke open. Julie didn't blink, but his world tilted. The pressure burst. Memories slammed forward, not fully formed, not ordered, but real. A boardroom with a 10-digit access screen, his voice calmly ending careers. Contracts closed with a nod. Zuri's face, on a screen, flagged as non-compliant, dismissed, discredited. His breath caught. He remembered signing the authorization, her removal, not loudly, not personally, but effectively. Julie staggered back a step. Zuri reached for him. "Julie." He pulled his arm away, just slightly. "Don't," he said. Not angry, just broken. The lead agent stepped forward. "We need to go." Zuri stepped in front of Julie, eyes hard. "You're not taking him like this." "We're not here for negotiation," the man said. "Mr. Van has legal ties, assets that require his presence. If you delay this process, it becomes obstruction." Zuri didn't move. Julie's fingers flexed at his sides. His heart thundered. He looked at her, not with anger, not with rage, but with questions. All the strange moments, the hesitation, the guarded conversations, the lies that had loved him. "I need the truth," he said to her, voice raw. "Now." Zuri didn't answer the agent. She turned to Julie, and her eyes filled with tears. Zuri's hands trembled. She opened her mouth once. Nothing came. Julie waited, not moving, not helping. He deserved truth. She pulled in a breath so deep it hurt. "I knew who you were the moment I saw the mark on your wrist." Julie's jaw clenched. "I didn't tell anyone," she continued. "Not because I was protecting you. At least, not at first." She looked down. "You're the reason I lost everything. My work, my contracts, my reputation. I raised concerns about what your systems were doing to people who looked like me. You signed the approval to push me out." Julie said nothing. "I found you barely breathing," she went on. "I had a choice. I could have turned you in. But I didn't. I told you your name was Jack. I said we were together. I made you believe in a life that didn't exist." Silence fell again. Zuri's next words cracked. "I didn't expect to care about you." Julie's shoulders rose, his throat working. "I didn't expect you to change." She hesitated. "I didn't expect to—" her voice broke. "To carry your child." Julie's eyes widened. No anger, no shock, just silence. She stepped closer. "I never planned this," she whispered. "But I can't undo it either." Behind them, the men waited. Still, watching. Julie looked past her for a long moment, then looked back. His voice came out quiet. "How much of what we had was real?" Zuri blinked. "All of it," she said. "Everything after the lie." Julie's eyes didn't move. And then, quietly, he stepped forward. The lead agent straightened. "Sir." Julie raised a hand. "Stand down," he said. The command held. "I'm not leaving with you," he added. "Sir." I said, "Stand down." The men hesitated. Julie stepped beside Zuri and turned toward the cabin. He didn't speak again, and neither did she. Would you stay after a betrayal like that? Could love survive a lie that deep? Tell us in the comments below. Your voice matters here. Julie didn't speak after turning the men away. He simply walked inside the cabin, picked up his coat, and left. Not a word to Zuri. Not a glance at the SUV team still standing outside. He moved with the kind of stillness that made noise feel irrelevant. A man carrying weight, not confusion, not fear, but something quieter and sharper, clarity. Zuri didn't follow. She didn't call out. She stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, the other pressed lightly to her stomach. The wind shifted, colder than before. The silence between them stretched. Julie walked down the trail that had once saved his life, and disappeared. She didn't know where he went, but the world did. Within 48 hours, the news hit every major outlet. Julie Van found alive. Van Quantum CEO returns after crash mystery. The footage was grainy at first, him exiting a private security vehicle, head down, dressed in worn clothes. He didn't speak to press. He didn't pose for photos. But the sight of him was enough to break the internet. Speculations exploded. Where had he been? Why had he vanished? Had he been kidnapped? Injured? Was this a cover-up? The media asked. The board of Van Quantum remained silent. Investors panicked. Stock spiked, then dipped, then surged again. And Julie? He said nothing. For 5 more days, he refused interviews, refused scripted statements, refused to be part of anyone's narrative but his own, until he walked through the front doors of Van Quantum headquarters in New York City, flanked by no one, wearing a plain black jacket and soft-soled shoes that didn't match the building's shine. He walked past the receptionist who couldn't speak. He took the elevator to the top floor, and reclaimed his company without a single raised voice. The board didn't know what to expect. Some assumed he'd be shaken, willing to be a figurehead while others made decisions for him. They'd already begun drafting damage control strategies, press memos, policy pivots. They didn't expect him to walk into the executive suite alone, pull out a chair, and begin listing operational changes without permission or apology. Julie didn't yell, didn't posture. He simply acted. First, he ended every surveillance-adjacent partnership with third-party data firms, effective immediately. Then he paused all active predictive behavior modeling, citing internal ethical review. He called for a freeze on new expansion contracts and summoned the internal compliance team, not to explain, but to answer. The CFO asked why. Julie answered, "Because we've built a machine that feeds itself, while people starve beneath it." They laughed, until they saw he wasn't smiling. He stepped back into the CEO role, not to grow Van Quantum, but to dismantle what had grown unchecked. He authorized independent audits. He opened buried archives. He began replying directly to the ethics reports that had been ignored for years, including Zuri's. Within a week, department heads resigned quietly. Within 2, entire divisions were placed under review. News trickled out. Van Quantum was turning inward, slowing down, recalculating. The tech world buzzed with confusion. Was this damage control? Guilt? A long game? But Julie knew. He wasn't returning to take control. He was returning to own the cost of what he helped build, and then begin again, on different terms. Zuri didn't watch the press coverage. She muted the notifications. She didn't check the news apps. She didn't click the articles forwarded by old colleagues, who now called her brave, visionary, ahead of her time. Now they wanted to praise what they once punished. She wasn't interested. She packed up the cabin slowly, one box at a time. Left some things behind, a chipped mug, the blanket Julie once folded, the carved wooden figure he gave her. She didn't leave because of shame. She left because it was time. The world had found him. But she had to find herself again. Back in the city, her apartment felt smaller than before. Not worse, just more honest. She returned to her community quietly. No announcements, no interviews. Just hands-on work. Volunteer code sessions at the center, back-end repairs for neighborhood apps, safety audits for platforms used by schools and shelters. The baby grew slowly. She didn't hide it. She also didn't name him publicly as the father. People asked. She offered half smiles. Some looked at her with judgment. Others with admiration. She didn't care either way. Her work was in front of her. Her future, uncertain, but hers. At night, when the apartment went quiet, she sometimes sat with her laptop and reread the original ethics memo she'd sent Van Quantum years ago. The one that got her flagged, ignored, shut out. It was now listed on the company's internal portal, credited, verified, active. Zuri closed the laptop. She didn't need credit. She needed peace. Julie's first public words came through a live stream, direct, unscripted. No podium, no graphics, no carefully lit background. Just him, sitting at a plain desk. The screen went live. He looked tired, clear-eyed. "My name is Julie Van," he began. "I survived the crash that was supposed to end my life. But the truth is, I survived long before that. Survived through systems designed to keep me powerful and untouched." He paused. "I remember what we built. I remember the decisions I made. The silence I rewarded, the patterns I allowed to grow." He leaned forward. "I also remember someone who found me when I was no one, who gave me warmth without knowing if I deserved it, who challenged the very foundation of what I thought success looked like." He didn't name Zuri, but every word pointed to her. Julie continued. "This company, Van Quantum, was built on innovation, but it ignored consequence. I signed approvals that hurt communities I didn't understand. I silenced voices that told hard truths. One of those voices was right. I see that now." He ended with a promise. "I will not lead this company back to power. I will lead it toward accountability, starting with full transparency of our data architecture and a long overdue correction of ethical violations previously dismissed." Then, he did the unthinkable. He submitted a full list of past flagged concerns, unredacted, to public record. Zuri's name topped the list. The feed cut. The world reacted. Commentators exploded. Shareholders panicked. Ethics boards demanded to interview him. Journalists ran comparisons between the old Julie and the new one. But the truth was no longer hidden. And for once, it wasn't about power. It was about the price. Julie had paid it. Now he was giving others the receipt. The letter arrived late, folded, unmarked, no return name, slipped under her apartment door with no sound. Zuri found it the next morning. The envelope was thick paper, handwritten. She opened it carefully, wary at first, then fully still as she read the words inside. "Zuri, I don't know what peace looks like for you. I don't know if I deserve to be part of it. But if you're willing, I'd like to talk. No press, no camera, no stage, just you and me. There's a cafe in Belmont, near that mural you once said felt like home. I'll be there Saturday at noon. If you don't come, I'll understand. Julie." She read it 3 times. The writing wasn't polished. It was direct, measured, almost cautious. It wasn't the voice of the man she'd met at a board meeting years ago. It wasn't the voice of the man who'd vanished into headlines. It was someone else. Someone who had remembered how to ask. She placed the letter on the table, walked into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and stood at the window. Outside, the neighborhood stirred slowly. Kids getting ready for school. A vendor unloading fruit. A woman across the street locking her door and rushing toward the bus stop. Normal, present. Zuri pressed her palm to her stomach. Rounder now. Steadier. She didn't decide right away. She let the hours pass. She let the idea settle. She had been many things in this story. Forgotten, wronged, trusted, betrayed. But this moment was hers to define. By Friday night, she had her answer. She would go, not for him, not for what they once had, but for what remained between them, and whether it could exist outside the fire. The cafe was quiet, tucked between an old bookstore and a laundromat. It had one wide window that faced the street and no sign overhead, just a hand-painted menu on the glass that caught the sunlight in pieces. Zuri arrived 5 minutes early. She didn't rush. She wore a plain dress, her coat open at the front, her hair tied up loosely. No makeup, no mask. She stepped inside and scanned the room. He was already there. Julie sat at the far end, a mug in his hand, steam curling in the air. He looked out the window like he hadn't noticed her yet, but she knew he had. His posture had changed. Still upright, still deliberate, but less guarded, less owned. Zuri walked over and sat across from him without a word. Julie looked up and met her eyes. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, softly, he spoke. "Thank you for coming," she nodded. "I almost didn't," she said. "I still don't know if I should have. I would have understood," he replied. They sat like that for a while. Not strangers, but no longer what they once were. The waitress approached quietly. Zuri ordered water. Julie didn't add anything else. When the server left, he spoke again. "I didn't write you for closure," he said, "or to explain away what happened. I wrote you because I haven't stopped thinking about the version of me you saw. Before I knew who I was." Zuri looked down at the table. "That version was built on a lie," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "But it wasn't fake." He leaned forward, voice lower. "I know who I was. I've seen it in records. I've felt it in boardrooms. But I've also seen who I became when the noise was gone." He paused. "You're the only one who's known both." Zuri didn't respond immediately. But her silence didn't carry anger now. It carried weight. Julie's hands stayed flat on the table. He didn't reach for her. He didn't plead. "I've been thinking a lot about control," he said. "How much of it I had. How much I used it to protect myself from ever needing anyone." Zuri tilted her head slightly. "And now I understand that needing someone isn't weakness," he said. "It's risk." He took a slow breath. "I don't want anything from you today. No answers, no resolution. I just want you to know that I see what I've done, and I won't erase it by trying to earn forgiveness overnight." Zuri's throat tightened. Julie went on. "I want to earn trust, not expect it, even if that means doing the work far from you. Even if it means raising our child from a distance, if that's what makes you feel safe." Her eyes flicked to his. "I'm not here to undo what happened," he said. "I'm here to show you that I understand the difference between being powerful and being present." She exhaled. That distinction mattered. She studied his face. He looked older. Not in years, but in honesty. Less polished, more grounded. The cafe around them stayed quiet. No one recognized them. No cameras flashed. This moment belonged only to them. "I don't hate you," she said at last. Julie's jaw tightened slightly. His eyes softened. "I don't know what we're supposed to be," she added. "But I know this. You are not who you were. And I'm not the woman who sat alone in that cabin holding a secret." He nodded once. "That's enough for me," he said. They didn't linger after that. There were no big goodbyes, no promises to meet again, no sudden decisions about the future. They stood from the table quietly. Julie paid for the drinks. Zuri didn't argue. Outside, the city hummed softly. Cars passed. A breeze moved through the trees lining the sidewalk. They walked slowly, side by side, not touching, just moving at the same pace. Julie looked ahead, then glanced toward her. "You okay?" Zuri nodded. "Getting there." He nodded back. They reached the corner where their paths split. Zuri paused. Julie did too. He didn't ask for more. She didn't offer more. But before stepping away, she said, "Our child will know the truth. The full truth." Julie met her eyes. "That's all I want." Zuri nodded. They turned in separate directions, but something had shifted. Not closure, not reunion, just clarity. Julie didn't walk away wondering what came next. He walked forward, finally understanding that presence wasn't made of promises. It was made of choice. And for the first time, they had both made the same one, to keep showing up, no matter how long it took. The world had changed, not because a corporation crumbled, or because one man stepped down. Those headlines faded fast, like most things built for attention, but something slower, quieter, stronger had taken root. 5 years had passed since Julie Van walked away from the machine that once made him untouchable. Now, he woke up before sunrise, not to read stock projections but to write lesson plans. He lived in a modest house on the edge of a neighborhood most investors never visited. One school district had reached out during his public reform work, asking if he would speak to their students about responsible technology. He agreed, then asked to stay. Julie Van, once the architect of silence, now taught high school juniors how to build clean code. His students didn't care about his past. They cared about how fast he answered their questions. They cared that he listened without cutting them off. They cared that he could explain recursion like it was a conversation, not a test. He wore the same watch every day, carried his lunch, rode the bus on rainy mornings. Some still recognized his name, but most recognized his presence. Zuri hadn't slowed down. If anything, the time away from corporate spaces sharpened her voice. She launched her non-profit from the ground up with a laptop, a table, and 3 former students who once interned under her. Code with Conscience began as a workshop for underrepresented youth. It grew into a national advocacy platform pushing for community-led digital tools, platform fairness, and policy reform. She didn't run it like a CEO. She ran it like a teacher, a mother, a watchdog, a builder. She testified when asked. She corrected industry jargon in live interviews. She mentored kids who reminded her of herself, bright, overlooked, tired of being called disruptive just for asking the right questions. Julie and Zuri saw each other often, co-parenting, collaborating on student projects, and sometimes just being still together in the same room. They had never made their relationship official again. No engagement, no big title, no ring. But what they shared was undeniable. They showed up. Every week, every call, every hard day. Trust wasn't declared, it was maintained. And for both of them, that was enough. Their daughter, Mira, was 5 and already asking for a soldering kit. She was curious like her mother, unafraid like her father, always touching things, poking at logic, asking questions that adults struggled to answer cleanly. Julie taught her to hold a screwdriver before she turned 3. Zuri taught her the difference between correction and curiosity. They shared custody without friction, splitting time, not love. On a Sunday in late spring, they gathered at the local park with Mira bouncing between their picnic blanket and the sandbox. No press, no cameras, no wealth on display, just fruit, sandwiches. A second-hand kite Julie couldn't get to fly, Mira's laughter echoing in the breeze. Zuri lay back on the blanket, sunglasses on, one hand across her chest. Julie sat beside her, legs stretched. They didn't talk about the past much anymore, but every now and then it crept in, not as regret, but as reference. Julie reached into the picnic basket and pulled out a note Mira had scribbled earlier, crayon letters and a stick figure family drawn in green and orange. He smiled, handed it to Zuri. She looked at the paper, then at him. "I don't miss the lie," she said. He nodded. She added, "But I miss the time we didn't know it was one." Julie looked out at the open park. A boy chased his brother with a kite Mira had abandoned. A dog barked at squirrels. The wind picked up. He turned back to Zuri. "Redemption wasn't headlines," he said quietly. "No," she agreed. "It was daily choices." They watched Mira dig her fingers into the soil, burying something small and shiny, probably a pebble she'd pretend was treasure later. Julie leaned back onto his elbows, eyes squinting at the sky, and they were still choosing. Would you forgive someone who built love on a lie if they tore it down for the truth? Could you trust a heart that chose to change? Share your answer in the comments. And if this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Victor Storytime for more powerful stories of redemption, betrayal, and real love. We'll be right here, still choosing. Before you go, let me leave you with this. Not every love story is clean. Not every apology comes early. And not every redemption is owed. Some must be earned slowly, one hard decision at a time. We live in a world that celebrates control, status, image, perfection. But the truth is, healing begins where control ends. Julie lost everything he thought defined him, his name, his empire, his past. But in that loss, he became someone who could finally see. Zuri carried pain, carried rage, carried a secret she didn't ask for, but through that weight, she still chose dignity. Together, they didn't rewrite the past. They did something harder. They faced it. Fully. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this. Power means nothing if it disconnects you from people. Love without honesty won't last. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is start again. So wherever you are in your own story, whether you're healing, rebuilding, or trying to be understood, know this: you're not alone. And your next choice can still be the one that changes everything. This is Mr. Victor Storytime. Thank you for listening. Now, tell us, what did this story leave in you?